Alright, so let's dive into the latest developments around the UK's position on the Ukraine conflict, particularly from the perspective of Sir Keir Starmer, the UK's Prime Minister. This news has quite a few layers, and if you're interested in global politics and the ever-shifting dynamics of international relations, there's a lot here to unpack. So, what's happening? Well, Sir Keir Starmer recently met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a summit of the European political community. This took place in Budapest, Hungary. Now, Starmer has reassured Zelensky, and really the world, that the UK's support for Ukraine is, as he put it, iron-clad. Yeah, iron-clad, a pretty strong word, right? But why does this matter, and what's the broader context? So here's where it gets interesting. You see, while the UK is firmly backing Ukraine, there's a bit of a cloud hanging over all of this support, and that cloud has to do with the United States. Right now, the US is by far the largest single provider of military aid to Ukraine. But, hey there are some concerns. Why? Well, with the next US presidential election approaching and the potential for Donald Trump to return to office, there are fears that American support for Ukraine could waver. Trump has previously suggested that he'd like to end the Ukraine conflict within a day, though he hasn't explained exactly how he'd do that. Okay, so let's pause here. Starmer, like many European leaders, is keenly aware of how crucial American support is. He's at this summit talking about UK support, but also he's subtly underscoring the importance of keeping the US engaged in this effort. The summit isn't just about Ukraine's sovereignty, it's about a bigger picture. Starmer mentioned that it's also about our freedom, our democracy, and our values. In other words, if Ukraine were to fall, it's not just a Ukrainian issue, it could ripple out and affect European security and even broader democratic ideals. At the same time, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary and the summit's host, had some rather blunt words. Yeah, blunt might be putting it lightly. Orban, who is known for his close ties with Moscow and his support of Trump, pointed out that Europe needs to take more responsibility for its own defense rather than relying so heavily on the United States. He said, to be blunt, we cannot wait for the Americans to protect us now. That's a strong statement, especially coming from a NATO member. Orban has always had a bit of a different stance compared to other European leaders, particularly when it comes to Russia. Orban's relationship with Russia has led to him being somewhat hesitant about imposing sanctions on Moscow or providing military aid to Ukraine. He's clearly of the view that Europe needs a plan B, one where it isn't so dependent on US military support. I mean, think about it, if Trump were to return and decide that US support for Ukraine should be dialed back, where would that leave Europe? So Orban's statement is a bit of a reality check for Europe to maybe start thinking about its long-term strategy. Now, back to Trump's position on Ukraine. He's hinted at wanting to bring the conflict to a quick resolution, but that's raised a lot of eyebrows. Some analysts are speculating that he might push Zelensky to negotiate with Russian President Vladimir Putin, possibly suggesting that Ukraine might have to cede some territory as part of a peace deal. This idea is controversial, to say the least, and it could put significant pressure on Zelensky if Trump is back in office. Let's come back to Starmer for a moment. He's walking a bit of a tightrope here. When asked about the possibility of Trump winning the election, Starmer was careful with his words. He avoided directly answering whether he thought Trump's return would be good for Europe and Ukraine. It's pretty clear, though, that he's focused on solidifying the UK's support for Ukraine, no matter what happens in the US. This was actually his 6th meeting with Zelensky since he became Prime Minister, so it's clear that he sees the UK's role in supporting Ukraine as a serious commitment. During the meeting, Starmer also had a bit of a rallying call to Ukraine's allies, saying they need to step up their support. He emphasized the importance of seeing this through and standing with Ukraine through these challenging times. It's almost as if he's signaling to other European leaders, and even perhaps future American leaders, that now isn't the time to waver. Zelensky responded by expressing his gratitude for the UK's continued support. It's been a tough period for Ukraine, and having allies like the UK standing by them has been crucial. And, it's not just the UK that's in this for the long haul. Leaders from other major European nations, like France's Emmanuel Macron and Germany's Olaf Scholz, have repeatedly affirmed their commitment to Ukraine. Macron, Scholz, and other European leaders are well aware of what's at stake, especially with Russia showing no signs of backing down. NATO's Secretary General, Mark Rutte, also had some important things to say. He pointed out that Trump's first term actually prompted Europe to invest more in its own defense, which is true, but he also said that Europe still needs to do more. Rutte underscored the ongoing threat from Russia and its alliances with countries like North Korea, China, and Iran, which is a concern for both Europe and the US. And here's a notable bit of history. Rutte was actually the Dutch Prime Minister during Trump's first term from 2017 to 2021. He mentioned that he worked well with Trump in the past, saying that Trump is extremely clear about what he wants and that he understands the importance of collaboration. This is interesting because it suggests that even if Trump's style is unique, there's still room for diplomatic engagement with him. There's one more curious note about Trump and Starmer. It was reported that Trump once described Starmer as very left-wing in private, though Starmer didn't directly address this when asked about it. Instead, he talked about his previous meeting with Trump in New York and their recent phone call after the US election, which he described as very positive, very constructive. Whether Trump actually holds Starmer in that very left-wing view, or whether that's something exaggerated, who knows? It's just one of those quirks of international diplomacy. So yeah, if we step back and look at the big picture here, there's a lot going on. Starmer's commitment to Ukraine is clear, but there's this underlying tension about the future of international support if Trump returns to power. Europe is increasingly aware that it may need to fend for itself more if US support becomes less reliable. Leaders like Orban and Rutte are voicing concerns that may push Europe toward greater defense independence. In the end, Starmer's message to Zelensky and to everyone else is one of resilience. He's saying, "We're here, we're committed, and we're not backing down." And while he's cautious about discussing what a Trump presidency might mean, his actions and words send a signal that the UK, at least, is prepared to support Ukraine regardless of what happens across the Atlantic. So yeah, this isn't just about one conflict in one region. It's about how alliances and commitments hold up under pressure. And right now for the UK, that support is ironclad.